The train wheezed to a stop at Toon Station on a Thursday afternoon in late April, 1873, depositing our protagonist onto a platform that seemed to shimmer in the unseasonable heat. João Baptista Ferreira, 42 years of age and a specialist in the ancient art of pisciculture, shifted his leather satchel and surveyed the dusty terminus with the practiced eye of a man who would learn to read water in all its forms, including the rippling mirages that rose from the packed earth. You might wonder what brings a fish-breeding expert from the scholarly corridors of Coimbra to this southern edge of Portugal, where the Algarve stretches its sun-baked fingers toward Africa. The answer lay folded in João's breast pocket, a letter on expensive paper, sealed with wax bearing the arms of the Menezes family, promising generous compensation for what seemed a straightforward task: to stock an old pond with carp and bream, to bring life to waters that had lain fallow for a decade. The coach ride from Tunes toward to Albufeira revealed a landscape that João observed with the mixed feelings of a man witnessing his country's transformation. Telegraph poles marched alongside ancient Roman roads, their wires humming with invisible messages, while shepherds below still guided their flocks by paths worn smooth over centuries. "Progress," he murmured to himself, though the word carried neither approval nor condemnation. The driver, a leathery fellow named Antonio, who chewed dried figs constantly, proved eager to share local knowledge. "Quinta das Águias, yes, I know it well. Dom Afonso only inherited it this winter, God rest his brother's soul." The man crossed himself reflexively. Strange that Dom Luis died so sudden, but then the rich have their own troubles, don't they? João had learned long ago that coach drivers were repositories of gossip, as surely as his ponds were repositories of fish. And so he listened with half an ear while observing the changing vegetation. Here, the maritime pines gave way to carob trees, their dark pods hanging like peculiar fish from gnarled branches. The limestone soil, he noted, would affect the water's alkalinity, a detail that mattered more to him than any aristocratic intrigue. His mind wandered to his workshop in Coimbra, to the careful charts of breeding cycles and water temperatures that lined its walls. 5 years now since Maria had died in the cholera outbreak. 5 years of finding solace in the predictable rhythms of spawning seasons and the quiet satisfaction of well-managed waters. His mother, 71 and still sharp as a filleting knife, had urged him to take this commission. "The sea air will do you good," she'd said, though they both knew it was the money that mattered. The estate appeared as the sun began its descent toward the Atlantic, revealing itself slowly like a cautious fish rising to inspect bait. The main house, whitewashed in the Moorish style with blue tiles framing the windows, sat on a rise overlooking groves of fig and almond trees. Below, João could make out what must be the pond, a dark mirror perhaps 3 acres in size, surrounded by reeds and wild oleander. Dom Afonso de Menezes greeted him personally, which João found surprising. The landowner was 58, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that spoke of Lisbon tailors and French pomade, yet his handshake was firm and his eyes alert. "Senor Ferreira, excellent. I trust your journey wasn't too taxing?" The pleasantries were brief, businesslike. "I'll have Tomás show you to your quarters. Tomorrow morning we'll discuss the pond in detail." Tomás, the groundskeeper, appeared to be a man of few words. Indeed, Antonio had mentioned he was known as the Mute, though whether from inability or choice remained unclear. He was perhaps 30, with the solid build of someone who worked with his hands and a way of moving that suggested he knew every stone and tree on the property. He led João to a modest but clean room above the estate's old pressing house, where the lingering scent of olive oil seemed to have seeped into the very walls. That evening, João took his simple meal in the kitchen rather than the dining room, a choice that seemed to please Rosa Correa, the cook. She was a handsome woman of perhaps 35 years, with the kind of practical efficiency that comes from managing a large household with limited resources. The old lord, Dom Luis, he preferred eating here too, she mentioned, while serving a plate of grilled dorada with roasted peppers. Said the dining room was too big for one person. As darkness settled over the quinta, João stood at his window, observing the landscape painted in shades of indigo and silver. Somewhere in that darkness lay the pond, waiting. In Coimbra, he had bred carp in monastery pools that had functioned since medieval times, coaxed trout to spawn in carefully managed streams, even raised ornamental goldfish for wealthy merchants who'd developed a taste for Oriental fashions. But something about this commission felt different, though he couldn't yet articulate why. The sound of the ocean reached him faintly, a rhythmic breathing that reminded him how far south he'd come. Here, Africa felt close, and the Moorish past seemed more present than Portugal's Christian centuries. Even the stars looked different, brighter, and more numerous than in the north, as if the sky itself were a vast pond teeming with celestial fish. The morning of May 2nd brought with it a peculiar reluctance among the estate workers that João found both intriguing and frustrating. He had requested 2 men to help him carry his sampling equipment to the pond, but when they learned the destination, sudden, urgent tasks elsewhere mysteriously appeared. Even the usually stalwart Tomas seemed uncomfortable, though he at least had the courtesy to accompany João to the pond's edge before finding reason to return to the house. The pond itself appeared unremarkable in daylight, a kidney-shaped body of water nestled in a natural depression, fed by an underground spring and bordered by limestone outcroppings, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. João estimated its depth at perhaps 4 meters at the center, suitable for carp, certainly, though the water had an unusual clarity that suggested low nutrient levels. He would need to test the mineral content, check for adequate vegetation for spawning, assess the potential for supplemental feeding. Dom Afonso joined him as he unpacked his testing kit, a collection of glass vials and chemical reagents that had served him well from the Minho to the Tagus. "The workers have stories about this pond," the landowner said, his tone carefully neutral. "Superstitious nonsense, naturally, but I thought you should know." "What manner of stories?" João asked, drawing water into a sampling bottle with practiced efficiency. "They claim the water glows on certain nights, like phosphorus or St. Elmo's fire. 3 men have drowned here over the past 10 years, all of them at night, all during the full moon." Dom Afonso's laugh was forced. "The locals say the pond is cursed, that the dead men's souls make the water shine to lure others to their doom." João had encountered such tales before. Every body of water deeper than a puddle seemed to accumulate legends like it accumulated silt. Yet as he held the water sample to the light, he noticed something that made him pause. Tiny specks that caught the sun in an unusual way, almost opalescent. His mind cataloged possibilities: mineral deposits, algae, perhaps some form of microscopic life. That evening, Rosa brought his supper to the pressing house, where he had established a makeshift laboratory on the old olive sorting table. She watched with interest as he arranged his bottles and instruments. "My late husband was a fisherman," she offered.
He used to say the sea held more mysteries than all the libraries in Lisbon. A wise man, João replied, examining a water sample through his hand lens.
Though, in my experience, mysteries usually have explanations, if one looks carefully enough. The workers won't go near the pond after dark, Rosa said, arranging bread and cheese on a plate with unnecessary precision. Even Tomas avoids it, and he fears nothing else on this estate. And you? Do you believe in the curse? She considered this carefully. I believe that when multiple people see the same thing, something is there to be seen. Whether it's supernatural or not, she shrugged eloquently. As if to test her theory, João returned to the pond that night, carrying a lantern and his sampling equipment. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to cast shadows through the cork oaks. He had been sitting on a limestone boulder for perhaps an hour, making notes on the nocturnal sounds. An owl, probably a barn owl from its screech, the rustle of what might be a genet in the underbrush. When he saw it, the glow began faintly, like starlight captured beneath the surface. Within minutes, the entire pond seemed to pulse with a blue-green luminescence, as if the water itself had become a living thing. João's scientific mind raced through possibilities, even as his heart quickened. He had read papers from the Royal Society about bioluminescence, had even observed it once in the Porto Harbor, but never with such intensity. Moving carefully to the water's edge, he filled several bottles, noting how the disturbance caused the glow to intensify, spreading in ripples of light. Back in his makeshift laboratory, he examined the samples with trembling hands. There, magnified by his lens, swam countless tiny organisms, each one a minute lantern in the darkness. Noctiluca scintillans, sea sparkle, the sailors called it. But what was a marine organism doing in a freshwater pond, and in such concentration? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Padre Miguel arrived on horseback, a man of perhaps 50, with the kind of refined features that suggested education beyond a rural parish. "I heard we had a natural philosopher visiting," he said, his Lisbon accent confirming João's suspicion about his origins. "I have some small interest in the sciences myself." Over tea, the priest proved surprisingly knowledgeable about aquatic biology, asking pointed questions about João's methods and findings. "You know," he said casually, "there was a similar phenomenon near Sagres some years ago. A pond that glowed." The locals were terrified until a professor from the university explained it was merely, he paused, natural phosphorescence. "And what became of that pond?" João asked. "Oh, it was drained. The landowner felt it attracted too much unwanted attention." The priest's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes, Señor Ferreira, the wisest course is to leave mysteries undisturbed." After the priest departed, João found himself more puzzled than before. The concentration of Noctiluca required regular replenishment. The organisms would die without proper salinity and nutrients. Someone was maintaining this population deliberately. But why? He thought of Dom Luis's sudden death, the workers' fear, the priest's veiled warnings. Like sediment stirred from a pond's bottom, questions rose and swirled, refusing to settle into clarity. The old wine cellar beneath the pressing house proved an ideal location for João's investigations, maintaining a constant cool temperature that preserved his samples and provided refuge from the early May heat that had descended on the Algarve like a wool blanket. He had transformed the space over several days, setting up his microscope on a marble-topped table that once held wine casks, arranging his chemical reagents on shelves that still bore the chalk marks of vintages from better times. His correspondence with Dr. Emmanuel Soares in Faro had yielded fascinating insights. The old physician, 66 and officially retired, but still sharp as a scalpel, had written back immediately upon receiving Joao's description of the phenomenon. "My dear friend," the letter read, "what you describe is indeed noctiluca, but the concentration you mention is extraordinary. In my 40 years of studying marine biology along our coast, I have never encountered such density in an isolated body of water. The metabolic requirements alone would be staggering." Joao had been pondering this exact problem when young Joaquim Silva appeared at the estate, sent by the employment agency in Albufeira as a temporary assistant. The boy, though at 24 Joao supposed he shouldn't think of him as such, had a fisherman's knowledge of the sea and quick, intelligent eyes that missed little. His father had worked the sardine boats until a storm took his life 3 winters past. "I know noctiluca," Joaquim said when Joao showed him the samples. "We call it ardentia, the burning water. Sometimes the whole bay lights up, but never for more than a few nights." He peered into the microscope with genuine curiosity. "How do they survive in fresh water?" "They don't," Joao replied. "Not naturally. Someone is adding seawater to the pond regularly and in significant quantities." This revelation led to careful observation of the estate's routines. Joao noted that twice weekly, a cart arrived laden with what the driver claimed was special mineralized earth for the orange groves, though it went nowhere near the orchards. Instead, Tomas would direct it to a shed near the pond, always ensuring Joao was occupied elsewhere during these deliveries. One morning, while cataloging the pond's existing fish population, a few surviving carp, miraculously adapted to the strange conditions, Joao observed Tomas adding something to the water from a large barrel. The groundskeeper moved with practiced efficiency, measuring careful amounts of what appeared to be a dark liquid into the pond at specific points along its perimeter. When Joao approached, Tomas quickly moved away, acknowledging him with only a brief nod. "He wasn't always mute," Rosa mentioned that afternoon, having brought Joao fresh bread and local cheese. She had taken to visiting his laboratory, showing an interest in his work that seemed genuine rather than merely polite. "Started about 5 years ago, just stopped talking. Some say it was grief. His parents died of fever. But he understands everything, writes when necessary." Joao had been examining water samples when she said this, but something in her tone made him look up. Rosa was studying one of his charts, and he realized with surprise that she was actually reading it, not just pretending to understand. "You're educated," he said, not quite a question. "My mother was a governess before she married. She taught me in secret." Rosa's smile was rueful. A cook who reads is still just a cook, but at least the recipes are easier to follow. That evening, Joao made a discovery that shifted his understanding entirely. Hidden among the mineral deposits at the pond's bottom were fragments of glass. Not random shards, but carefully crafted spheres, broken now, but clearly once part of sealed containers. He also found traces of tar and hemp fiber, the kind used in maritime rope. Joaquim, proving himself increasingly valuable, had been making inquiries in the village. "The fishermen talk about lights on the cliff tops," he reported. "Not every night, but regular-like. Always when the moon is dark. They say it's smugglers, but," he shrugged, "smugglers have been using these coasts since before the Romans. It's like saying the sea has fish." The pattern was beginning to emerge, like the image in one of those optical illusion drawings that suddenly snaps into focus. The pond wasn't just harboring Noctiluca. It was being used for something that required the organism's light. But what, and by whom? Joao's contemplation was interrupted by an unexpected delivery. A case of bottles arrived, labeled as preserved fish specimens from Lisbon's Natural History Museum. Yet when Joao opened them, he found they contained concentrated seawater, dense with Noctiluca. The shipping manifest was signed with an illegible scrawl, the sender's address non-existent. "Someone knows what you're doing," Joachim said nervously.
Someone who either wants to help or wants me to understand that they're watching, Joao finished. He thought of Padre Miguel's warning, of Dom Afonso's nervous manner, of Tomas's silent vigilance. Like the pond itself, the estate seemed to have depths that the surface didn't reveal, currents moving beneath that followed their own mysterious logic. That night, unable to sleep, Joao returned to his samples. Under the microscope, the Noctiluca swirled in their endless dance, each one a tiny star in a microscopic universe. He had bred fish for half his life, understood the delicate balance required to maintain artificial ecosystems. Whoever was managing this pond understood it too, but their purpose remained as murky as pond water after a storm. The scientific part of him was fascinated. The practical part, the part that had learned caution through years of dealing with wealthy patrons and their secrets, knew he was swimming in dangerous waters.
Padre Miguel's second visit came on a gray morning in mid-May, when clouds from the Atlantic had rolled in during the night, bringing with them the smell of salt and distant rain. Joao found the priest waiting in his makeshift laboratory, examining the charts and diagrams with an attention that seemed more than casual interest. "Forgive the intrusion," the padre said, though his tone suggested he felt entitled to be there. "Dom Afonso mentioned you've been making remarkable progress with your investigations." There was something in the way he said the word that made Joao set down his sampling bottle carefully. The priest's expensive boots, which Joao had noticed during their first meeting, were freshly polished, despite the dusty walk from the main house. Everything about the man suggested careful maintenance of appearances, from his well-cut cassock to his manicured hands. "The pond presents some interesting biological puzzles," Joao replied neutrally. "Though I'm sure such matters hold little interest for a man of God." "On the contrary," Padre Miguel picked up one of Joao's journals, flipping through it with practiced ease. "I studied natural philosophy at the seminary in Lisbon before taking orders. God's creation reveals itself through scientific inquiry as much as through scripture. Wouldn't you agree?" The conversation that followed was like a chess game where both players pretended not to notice they were using different boards. The priest spoke of faith and reason, of the dangers of disturbing established orders, both natural and social. Joao responded with careful observations about pond ecosystems and breeding cycles, each man saying one thing while meaning another. "There was an incident near Sagres," Padre Miguel said, settling into the room's only comfortable chair as if preparing for a lengthy discourse. "Perhaps 15 years ago, when I was a young priest, newly assigned to the Algarve. A coastal pond, much like this one, that exhibited similar peculiarities." Zhao continued preparing his samples, but listened intently. The priest's storytelling had the practiced quality of a sermon, each pause calculated for effect. The local fishermen were terrified. They spoke of lights beneath the water, of voices calling from the depths. The bishop himself came from Faro to investigate. Do you know what he found? I imagine there was a natural explanation, Joao said. Indeed. Smugglers had been using the pond to hide contraband. They'd discovered that certain marine organisms could be cultivated to create light, marking their cache locations without need for torches that might alert the authorities. The priest's smile was thin. Clever, really, using superstition as a shield for criminal enterprise. And what became of these smugglers? Oh, they were never caught. Warned, perhaps, by someone sympathetic to their cause. They abandoned the pond, moved their operations elsewhere. Padre Miguel stood, brushing imaginary dust from his cassock. The authorities drained the pond anyway, said it was a health hazard. The landowner lost everything, his property, his reputation, died in poverty 3 years later. The warning couldn't have been clearer if the priest had written it on the wall. Joao felt the familiar tension of navigating between powerful interests, like trying to breed fish in waters claimed by competing predators. After the priest left, Rosa appeared with coffee and a worried expression. "He's not really here about your soul," she said quietly. "No," Joao agreed, "but whose interests does he serve?" Rosa glanced toward the door, then moved closer. "The old lord, Dom Luis. He and the padre had many private meetings, always at night, always when the moon was dark. I served them wine once and heard them speaking about ships' manifests and customs inspections." This revelation recast everything Joao had observed. A priest with connections to Lisbon, expensive tastes, and knowledge of smuggling operations. An estate with mysterious deliveries and a pond that glowed with cultivated bioluminescence. The pieces were aligning like fish in a spawning pattern, following ancient imperatives he was only beginning to understand. That afternoon, Joachim returned from the village with disturbing news. There's talk of a Dutch merchant ship arriving next week. The Zeevaart, Captain Van Berg commanding. The fishermen say he always anchors just outside the harbor limits, conducts his business through intermediaries. What kind of business? Dried fish, officially. But, Joachim lowered his voice, my cousin works in the customs house. He says Van Berg's ships always sail higher in the water leaving than arriving, despite supposedly taking on cargo. Joao pondered this information while examining his latest water samples. The Noctiluca population remained stable, even increasing slightly. Someone had added fresh seawater to the pond within the last day, maintaining the delicate salinity balance required for the organism's survival. The precision of it impressed him, even as its purpose disturbed him. That evening, he walked the pond's perimeter, noting potential hiding spots and access points. The limestone formations created natural cavities, some extending below the waterline. A man who knew where to look could hide considerable cargo in such spaces, retrieve it quickly when the bioluminescent waters revealed the exact locations. "You're thinking like a criminal now," he told himself, but the puzzle compelled him forward. His commission was to stock the pond with fish, yet he sensed that completing this simple task without understanding the deeper currents might prove not just difficult but dangerous. As darkness fell, he noticed lights on the coastal cliffs, just as Joachim had described. 3 flashes, a pause, then 2 more. A signal, clearly. But to whom? The ocean stretched endlessly beyond, keeping its secrets as surely as the pond kept its own. Joao returned to his laboratory, added new observations to his journal, and wondered how many others were watching the same lights, reading their own meanings in the darkness. Captain Hendrik van Berg arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning that promised rain, but delivered only oppressive humidity. João observed him from the laboratory window, a man of perhaps 45 years, with the kind of careful grooming that suggested prosperity without ostentation. His clothing was well-made but practical, his bearing military without being rigid. This was someone who had learned to navigate both rough seas and polite society. Dom Afonso received the captain in the main house, but within an hour, Van Berg had somehow learned of João's presence and requested a meeting. They encountered each other, as if by chance, near the old olive press. "Senor Ferreira, I understand you're a specialist in aquaculture," the captain said, in accented but precise Portuguese. "I have some interest in the dried fish trade. Perhaps we might discuss the breeding of species suitable for preservation." It was a reasonable request, even a logical one, yet João felt the conversation had been orchestrated as carefully as the pond's ecosystem. They walked together through the estate, Van Berg asking knowledgeable questions about breeding cycles, salt curing processes, the economics of fish farming. The man clearly understood more about aquatic biology than most merchants would require. "This pond," Van Berg said, gesturing toward the dark water. "Dom Afonso mentioned you're planning to stock it. Carp, perhaps? They preserve well. Good market in the interior." "The conditions are challenging," João replied carefully. "The water chemistry is unusual." "Ah, yes. The famous glow. I've heard the stories." The captain's laugh seemed genuine. "Sailors are worse than old women for superstition. Though I confess, I'd like to see it myself. Natural phosphorescence, I assume." Before João could respond, Joaquim appeared, ostensibly to report on village supplies, but actually, João suspected, to observe the Dutchman. The young man's timing was too convenient, his arrival too quiet. Later, João would learn that Rosa had sent him, her network of information extending further than he'd realized. That afternoon, Van Berg made an unexpected gesture. "I support a small orphanage in Albufeira," he mentioned casually. "The sisters there do remarkable work with limited resources. Perhaps you'd accompany me on a visit? I find it helps to understand a community through its charitable works." The orphanage occupied a converted merchant's house near the harbor, its walls whitewashed but showing salt damage, its courtyard filled with the sounds of children's voices. Sister Bernadette, ancient and sharp-eyed, greeted Van Berg with genuine warmth. The captain distributed small gifts, practical things like writing slates and wool blankets, while the children clustered around him with obvious affection. "He comes every time his ship anchors," the sister explained to João. 3 years now, regular as the tides. Some say Dutch merchants are cold, but Captain Van Berg has a good heart." Yet João noticed things that troubled him. Several of the older boys, perhaps 14 or 15, wore new clothes of sailor's cut. When he asked about their prospects, Sister Bernadette mentioned that Van Berg sometimes offered positions on his ships to boys with aptitude. "Better than begging or stealing," she said, though something in her expression suggested unasked questions. On the return journey, Van Berg spoke of trade routes and profit margins, of the challenge of competing with English merchants who controlled much of the preserved fish trade. "The Portuguese waters produce the finest fish," he said, "but your methods of preservation could be improved. Science and commerce should be partners, don't you think?" That evening, João found Joaquim waiting in the laboratory with interesting news. "I followed one of those orphan boys, the older ones. He went straight to the harbor, met with men I recognize, not fishermen, but the kind who work nights and ask no questions. The pattern was becoming clearer. Van Berg's charity work provided perfect cover for recruiting young men without families to ask awkward questions. Boys who could move freely between ship and shore, who could carry messages or small packages without arousing suspicion. Rosa arrived with supper and her own observations. The captain's ship. It anchored yesterday at sunset, but no cargo has been unloaded at the main dock. Small boats have been going back and forth after dark, landing at the small beaches below the cliffs. João spent that night updating his journal, drawing connections between observations like a fisherman mending nets. The pond, the Noctiluca, the signals from the cliffs, Van Berg's convenient charity work, each thread connected to others, forming a pattern that suggested organized smuggling on a scale larger than he'd initially imagined. Near midnight, he observed activity at the pond. Dark figures moved along its edge, and he heard the splash of something heavy entering the water. The glow of Noctiluca erupted briefly, then subsided. By morning, all traces of the nighttime visitors had vanished, though João found fresh marks on the limestone where ropes had been secured. Dr. Suarez's latest letter, which arrived that morning, added another dimension to the puzzle. The concentration of Noctiluca you describe would require not just seawater, but specific nutrients, likely fish oil, or similar organic compounds. Someone with knowledge of marine biology is maintaining this population deliberately. Be careful, my friend. Such knowledge in the wrong hands serves darker purposes than science. João stood at his laboratory window watching Van Berg's carriage depart the estate. The captain had left a standing offer to purchase any preserved fish João might produce, even providing advance payment as a gesture of good faith. The money lay on João's desk, more than he'd earn in 3 months of regular work. It felt like both a bribe and a test, though of what he couldn't yet say. The last week of May brought unseasonable storms from the Atlantic, but João chose a calm night between tempests for his vigil. He had prepared carefully, darkening his lantern with cloth, wearing dark clothing that wouldn't reflect moonlight, choosing a position among the limestone outcroppings that provided both concealment and clear sightlines to the pond. The waiting reminded him of fishing. Long stretches of patience, punctuated by moments requiring swift decision. He thought of his father, dead these 20 years, who had taught him to read water before he could properly read words. "Fish think in 3 dimensions," the old man had said, "while we humans barely manage 2. Tonight, João was trying to think like both predator and prey, observer and participant. Near midnight, the pond began its eerie illumination. The Noctiluca responded to some disturbance beneath the surface, creating ribbons of blue-green light that swirled like liquid aurora. Then he saw them. 2 men moving with practiced silence along the eastern shore. One was Tomás, unmistakable even in darkness by his distinctive gait. The other remained in shadow, but his movements suggested familiarity with the terrain. They worked with remarkable efficiency. Using hooked poles, they pulled something from the water, sealed containers, just as João had suspected. The bioluminescence clung to the containers briefly, making them easy to track, even as the men moved them to a waiting cart. João counted 6 containers, each roughly the size of a wine cask, but clearly watertight, judging by how they shed water. What happened next shifted João's understanding entirely. The second man spoke. Just a few words, but enough for João to recognize the voice. It was Joaquim, his assistant, whom he'd trusted with his observations and theories, was actively participating in the very operation Joao was investigating. The betrayal stung more than it should have. Joao had learned long ago that trust was a luxury in his profession, yet he'd allowed himself to believe the young man's enthusiasm for learning was genuine. Perhaps it was, he reflected bitterly. Joachim was certainly learning, just not the lessons Joao had intended to teach. The men finished their work and departed, leaving Joao alone with his racing thoughts and the gradually dimming pond. He waited another hour before emerging from his hiding spot, then carefully examined the area where they'd worked. Fresh rope marks on the limestone, boot prints in the soft earth, and tellingly, a small glass vial that had fallen from someone's pocket, the kind used for preserving biological samples identical to those in Joao's own laboratory. Returning to his quarters near dawn, Joao found Rosa waiting with coffee and a worried expression. "You saw them," she said. It wasn't a question. "You knew?" "I suspected. Joachim asks too many questions, appears too conveniently." She poured the coffee with steady hands, despite the gravity of the conversation. "But there's more you need to know. Dom Afonso isn't master here, not truly. His brother left debts, terrible ones. The estate would be lost without the income from whatever they're doing." This revelation recast the landowner's nervous manner in a new light. Joao had assumed Dom Afonso was complicit. Perhaps he was merely trapped, like a fish in an ever-tightening net. "There are ledgers," Rosa continued, producing a worn notebook from her apron. "I've been copying entries when I dust the study. Look." The figures told a story of gradual entrapment. Dom Luis had borrowed heavily to maintain appearances, using future harvests as collateral. When crops failed, he'd borrowed more from increasingly questionable sources. The dates aligned with when the pond's curse had begun. "These entries here," Rosa pointed to a column of numbers, "they don't match any legitimate income from the estate. They appear monthly, always after the new moon." Joao studied the pattern. Smuggling fees. They're using the estate as a way station, the pond as a drop point. "But what are they moving?" "Does it matter?" Rosa asked. "Tobacco, spirits, perhaps things worse? The war in Cuba has made many goods scarce and valuable." A knock at the door interrupted them. Joachim entered, his expression carefully neutral, though he paused, seeing Rosa. "Senor Ferreira, Dom Afonso requests your presence. Captain Van Berg has returned with an urgent proposal." Joao met the young man's eyes steadily. "I'll come shortly. Wait outside." When Joachim left, Rosa touched Joao's arm. "Be careful. Men who traffic in secrets don't like them exposed." The meeting in Dom Afonso's study was tense with unspoken knowledge. Van Berg sat comfortably, too comfortably, like a man certain of his position. The landowner looked haggard, older than his years. "Senor Ferreira," Van Berg began, "I understand you've made remarkable progress understanding the pond's unique properties. I'd like to propose a partnership." "Your scientific knowledge, combined with my commercial networks, could be quite profitable." "I was hired to stock the pond with fish," Joao replied evenly. "Yes, and you'll do that. But surely a man of science sees the larger possibilities. Controlled bioluminescence has applications beyond mere curiosity. Navigation, signaling, even medical research. You could publish papers, gain recognition, all while earning enough to fund any research you choose." The offer was seductive in its rationality. Van Berg was offering to legitimize what was clearly an illegal operation, to transform it into something that served science as well as profit. João thought of his mother in Coimbra, of the research he'd always wanted to conduct but couldn't afford, of the recognition that had eluded him. Yet he also thought of those drowned men, of the orphan boys recruited for dangerous work, of the fear in the workers' eyes. Some prices, his father had taught him, were too high, regardless of the profit. The morning after Van Berg's proposal found João intercepting Tomás near the tool shed, where the groundskeeper was preparing the day's supplies. The mute man's eyes widened slightly at João's approach, but he didn't flee. Instead, he stood still, waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that silence could be its own form of communication. "I saw you at the pond," João said simply, "2 nights ago." Tomás remained motionless for a long moment, then slowly reached into his pocket. João tensed, but the groundskeeper merely produced a small slate and chalk, the kind children used for lessons. He wrote in careful letters, "I know you saw." "Then you know I must ask why." Tomás erased the slate, wrote again, "My sister, consumption. Medicine from Lisbon costs more than I earn in a year." The words hung between them like morning mist over the pond. João had lost his wife to cholera. He understood the helplessness of watching disease claim someone beloved. Yet understanding and condoning were different creatures, as distinct as carp and pike, despite sharing the same waters. "Show me," João said. They walked to the village, Tomás moving with unusual urgency now that his secret was exposed. The cottage stood at the settlement's edge, small but meticulously clean. Inside, a young woman of perhaps 25 lay propped on pillows, her breathing labored despite the mild morning. The resemblance to Tomás was clear in her dark eyes and strong features, though illness had carved hollows in her cheeks. She smiled at her brother's arrival, then looked questioningly at João. Tomás wrote quickly on his slate, showed it to her. "Friend, trustworthy." "I'm Teresa," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "Tomás has mentioned the fish expert from Coimbra. He says you're teaching him about water quality and breeding cycles." So Tomás had been learning from João's work, even while betraying him. The groundskeeper wrote again. "I maintain the pond, 3 years now. They pay enough for her medicine, doctor visits. Without it, she dies." João examined the medicine bottles on the bedside table, legitimate preparations from a Lisbon pharmacy, expensive but genuine. Whatever else this smuggling ring did, they at least honored their financial obligations to their workers. "Your brother risks prison for this," João told Teresa. "I know. I've begged him to stop, but..." She gestured helplessly at her condition. "Pride is a luxury we can't afford." On the walk back, Tomás wrote more freely, as if confession had broken a dam. The operation had begun under Dom Luis, who'd been desperate for money. Van Berg provided the expertise, the connections. The pond's natural spring made it perfect. Constant water circulation prevented stagnation. The limestone cavities provided hiding spots, and the Noctiluca cultivation meant they could mark exact locations without permanent fixtures that might be discovered. "What do they smuggle?" João asked. Tomás hesitated, then wrote, "Medicine. Untaxed. From Macau through Dutch ports." João stopped walking. "Medicine? Opium-based. Laudanum, morphine. Hidden in fish oil containers. High profit, small volume."
The full picture suddenly crystallized. The medical trade from the East, controlled by monopolies and taxed heavily, created enormous profit margins for smugglers. Van Berg's legitimate fish business provided perfect cover, while the orphan boys served as runners and lookouts. The pond acted as a temporary cache, safer than keeping contraband on ships that might be searched. That afternoon, João confronted Joaquim in the laboratory. The young man didn't deny his involvement, though he had the grace to look ashamed. "They approached me the second day," Joaquim admitted. "Said they knew why you were really here, that Dom Afonso had hired you to investigate. They offered me more than I'd make in 5 years of honest work." "And you believed them?" "No, but I took their money anyway." Joaquim's laugh was bitter. "You don't understand what it's like, senor. My mother takes in washing. My sisters need dowries. I saw a chance and took it. Yet you warned me about the signals, told me about Van Berg's ship. Because I'm not entirely without conscience. I thought I could play both sides, help you just enough while still earning their money." He met Joao's eyes. "I know how that sounds." João considered the young man before him, ambitious, desperate, caught between poverty and opportunity. How different was he from Tomás, from Dom Afonso himself?
The entire estate seemed trapped in webs of necessity and compromise. "There's something else," Joaquim said. "Padre Miguel isn't just watching. He reports to someone in Lisbon, maybe the government. Van Berg knows but doesn't care. He says the priest can be managed." This news reframed the priest's warnings. Perhaps he wasn't protecting the smugglers but gathering evidence against them. Or perhaps he was playing an even deeper game, taking payments from both sides while maintaining his cover of moral authority. That evening, Rosa brought disturbing news. "Dom Afonso has received a letter. His creditors are calling in their debts. If he can't pay within the month, they'll seize the estate." The deadline explained Van Berg's urgency, his offer of partnership. Something was forcing the smuggling ring to accelerate their timeline, to take risks they'd previously avoided. João thought of the approaching summer months when calmer seas would make naval patrols more frequent. Perhaps the operation's days were numbered regardless of his investigation. He stood at his window, watching the sun set over the pond. The water appeared peaceful, giving no hint of its hidden purpose. Like the estate itself, like everyone connected to it, the pond presented one face while concealing another. Tomorrow he would have to make a choice, expose the operation and destroy the livelihoods of people he'd come to understand, if not forgive, or become complicit in crimes that violated both law and his conscience. The 1st of June arrived with thunderheads building over the Atlantic, dark towers of cloud that promised the kind of tempest that gave the Algarve coast its reputation among sailors. João could feel the pressure dropping in his bones, an ache that reminded him he was no longer young. The fish in the pond had gone deep, sensing what was coming with instincts older than human civilization. By afternoon, the wind had picked up, sending orange blossoms swirling like snow across the estate grounds. Dom Afonso paced his study like a caged animal, and João understood why. Tonight was to be a major transfer, Van Berg's largest shipment yet, timed to coincide with the new moon. The storm would make everything infinitely more dangerous. "We should postpone," João heard the landowner arguing with someone in the hallway. Van Berg's voice carried despite the wind. "Impossible! The ship sails with tomorrow's tide, storm or not. The buyers in Seville won't wait." João had spent the morning making his own preparations. He documented everything meticulously: dates, times, names, the chemical composition of the Noctiluca cultivation system. His journal contained enough evidence to convict everyone involved, but he'd hidden it carefully, wrapped in oilcloth and concealed in the limestone caves above the pond. If something happened to him, Rosa knew where to find it. The storm struck in earnest just after dark. Rain hammered the terracotta roof tiles like musket fire, and lightning turned the world into a series of stark tableaus, moments of brilliant clarity followed by absolute darkness. João watched from his window as figures struggled through the tempest toward the pond, their lanterns barely visible through the sheets of rain. Then everything went wrong at once. A lightning strike hit one of the cork oaks near the pond, the thunder so immediate and overwhelming that João's ears rang. In the brief illumination, he saw men scrambling, containers floating free in the pond as the operation descended into chaos. Someone was shouting. He could see rather than hear them through the wind and rain. Then he noticed something that chilled him more than the storm: flames at the main house. João ran through the rain, reaching the kitchen to find Rosa throwing buckets of water on a fire that had started in the pantry. "Lightning struck the chimney," she gasped. "The sparks came down into the cooking oil." Together they fought the flames while the storm raged. Tomás appeared, then Joachim, and even Van Berg abandoned the pond operation to help prevent the house from burning. For those desperate minutes, smuggler and investigator, servant and master worked side by side, united by the more immediate threat of fire. They succeeded in containing the blaze to the pantry, though the damage was considerable. As the storm began to exhaust itself, moving inland with diminishing fury, the exhausted firefighters collapsed in the kitchen. Van Berg's fine clothes were ruined, his face streaked with soot. Dom Afonso looked like he'd aged a decade in an hour. "The shipment?" the landowner asked weakly. "Lost," Van Berg replied. "Half of it anyway. The containers broke free, scattered. We'll be lucky to recover anything in this mess." It was then that Joachim surprised everyone. "Senor Ferreira could help," he said. "He knows the pond better than anyone now. He's mapped every current, every depth." All eyes turned to João. Van Berg's expression was calculating, Dom Afonso's desperate. Even Tomás watched intently, his face revealing nothing. "Why would I do that?" João asked. "Because," Rosa said quietly, "you're not a cruel man. And without that shipment, this estate is finished. Everyone here loses everything." João thought of his documentation, safe in its hiding place. He thought of Teresa's medicine, of the orphan boys, of all the compromised choices that had led to this moment. The storm had been like divine intervention, nature itself rejecting human schemes. Yet here were the schemers, reduced to merely human beings, wet and frightened and facing ruin. "I'll help recover what can be recovered," João said finally. "But on conditions. The pond operations end after this." Dom Afonso sells the estate to cover his debts. The workers are given proper severance, and Tomás receives enough to care for his sister. Van Berg started to protest, but João cut him off. "You've lost half your shipment, probably more. The authorities will investigate the fire, ask questions. Padre Miguel has been documenting everything. Yes, I know about his reports to Lisbon. Your operation here is finished regardless." The Dutchman's face went through several expressions before settling on resigned acceptance. "You're more clever than I credited, Senor Ferreira." They worked through the night, using Joao's knowledge of the pond's currents to recover what containers remained intact. The Noctiluca, agitated by the storm, created an otherworldly display, turning the disturbed water into a galaxy of blue-green stars. By dawn, they'd salvaged perhaps a third of the shipment. Enough for Van Berg to avoid complete disaster, not enough to make the risks worthwhile. As the sun rose over a world washed clean by rain, Joao stood by the pond with Rosa. The water was already beginning to clear. The Noctiluca population disrupted, but not destroyed. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Complete my original commission, stock the pond with carp, leave it better than I found it." He paused. "And you?" "Dom Afonso has agreed to give me a reference and severance enough to start a small restaurant in Faro. I've saved recipes for years, waiting for a chance." The authorities arrived on the 4th of June. A contingent of officials from Faro, led by a customs inspector whose elaborate uniform seemed wildly inappropriate for the rural estate. With them came Padre Miguel, his expression carefully neutral, though Joao noticed the priest's eyes missed nothing as they surveyed the fire damage and the unusual activity around the pond. Joao had expected this visit since sending his own carefully worded letter to Dr. Soares, knowing his old friend had connections in Faro's administrative circles. He'd written of the pond's remarkable bioluminescence as a natural phenomenon worthy of scientific study, mentioning only in passing the evidence of previous commercial activities that had now ceased. The inspector, a man named Carvalho, with the demeanor of someone who'd seen every form of human deception, interviewed each person separately. Joao presented his role simply: a fish-breeding specialist hired to restore the pond, who'd discovered interesting marine organisms requiring further study. He showed Carvalho his scientific notes, carefully edited to remove the most damaging observations while maintaining enough detail to seem comprehensive. "These organisms, the Noctiluca," Carvalho said, "they're valuable? Scientifically, yes. Commercially, hardly at all. They're too delicate to transport, impossible to preserve. Their only use is aesthetic. They create beautiful displays that might attract visitors, nothing more." Dom Afonso, coached by Joao, told a story of inheriting his brother's debts and trying desperately to make the estate profitable. Yes, Captain Van Berg had expressed interest in establishing a fish-drying operation, but the storm had convinced him the location was unsuitable. The fire was simply unfortunate timing, making a difficult situation worse. Van Berg himself had already sailed, his ship departing with the morning tide. He'd left behind a signed statement acknowledging his legitimate business interests had proven unworkable. The orphanage received a final generous donation, though Sister Bernadette was told the captain wouldn't be returning to Portuguese waters. Tomas, when questioned through written responses, maintained he was simply a groundskeeper who'd followed his employer's instructions to maintain the pond. His sister's medical needs were acknowledged, and Joao had arranged for a Faro doctor to take over her care at reduced rates, funded partially by the sale of Joao's equipment that he claimed was damaged beyond repair in the storm. The most delicate interview was Joaquim's. The young man had wanted to confess everything, but Joao had spent hours convincing him that the truth would destroy more lives than it would save. "You made mistakes from desperation, not malice," Joao told him. "Use this second chance wisely." Joaquim told the inspector he'd been hired as an assistant, had helped with scientific observations, nothing more. His nervousness was attributed to youth and the excitement of recent events. Carvalho seemed suspicious, but had no evidence to pursue further questioning. Padre Miguel's role remained ambiguous to the end. He testified that he'd noticed unusual activities and had reported his concerns to his superiors, who'd asked him to monitor the situation. Whether he'd been protecting the smugglers or gathering evidence against them, he never clarified. The priest departed after the interviews, mentioning he'd been reassigned to a parish in the interior. "A convenient fire," Carvalho commented to João privately. "Destroyed just enough evidence to make prosecution impossible, but not enough to hide that something was happening." "Nature has its own timing," João replied carefully. The inspector studied him for a long moment. "Dr. Suarez speaks highly of you. Says you're a man of integrity, who understands that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing." After the authorities departed, the estate felt hollow, like a pond after spawning when the fish have exhausted themselves with reproduction. Dom Afonso had aged visibly through the ordeal, but something in his bearing had changed too. Relief, perhaps, at being free of his brother's shadow and schemes. "I've found a buyer," he told João. "A wine merchant from Porto who wants to restore the vineyards. He's agreed to keep the current workers, even expand operations." The pond's future was secured too. João's report on the bioluminescence had attracted interest from the University of Lisbon. They would send students to study the phenomenon, ensuring its preservation for scientific purposes. The new owner, intrigued by the prospect of hosting researchers, agreed to maintain it as a natural sanctuary. Rosa organized a farewell dinner in the fire-damaged kitchen, its blackened walls a reminder of the night everything changed. She prepared a feast from traditional Algarve recipes: cataplana stew with local shellfish, fig and almond tart, wine from the estate's last good vintage. The gathering included everyone who'd survived the crisis together, even Tomas's sister Teresa, who'd insisted on attending despite her weakness. "To second chances," Dom Afonso raised his glass, and the toast carried more weight than mere words. João spent his last week at the estate completing his original commission. He introduced young carp into the pond, their golden forms visible in the clearer water as the Noctiluca population naturally diminished without artificial support. The fish would thrive here, he knew, growing fat on natural fodder, breeding in the reed beds, creating the kind of sustainable ecosystem that had been his life's work. On his final morning, João stood at the pond's edge, watching the sunrise paint the water copper and gold. The surface was calm, giving no hint of its recent service to human schemes. Nature, he reflected, had an admirable ability to reclaim its dignity, regardless of human interference. Mid-June brought a different quality of light to the Algarve, the summer sun climbing higher each day, baking the earth to the hardness of fired clay. João packed his equipment methodically, each instrument cleaned and wrapped with the care of a father preparing a child for a journey. His microscope, which had revealed the pond's luminous secret, went into its leather case with special tenderness. The estate had already begun its transformation. The new owner, Senor Rodriguez from Porto, had arrived with architects and agricultural specialists, their plans spread across the same table where Van Berg had once counted smuggled goods. They spoke of modern irrigation systems, of grafting techniques from France, of making the quinta competitive in international markets. Progress, that relentless tide, washing away the old mysteries with efficiency and electric lighting. Rosa managed the kitchen for the last time, training her replacement while organizing her own departure for Faro. She'd rented a small building near the fish market, perfect for the restaurant she'd dreamed of through years of serving others. "I'll call it O Lago Luminoso," she told João, "the luminous lake." A reminder that even the darkest waters can hold light. Tomás had found employment with Rodriguez, who valued his knowledge of the land over his inability to speak. His sister Teresa would move to Faro for better medical care, the treatments now funded by a scholarship João had arranged through Dr. Soares, actually his own savings, but presented as charity to preserve the siblings' pride. Joaquim surprised everyone by refusing offers of steady work, choosing instead to enroll in the new navigation school in Lisbon. "I want to understand the sea properly," he explained to João. "Not just use it, but comprehend it the way you understand fresh water." He'd carry a letter of recommendation from João, carefully worded to emphasize his intelligence while omitting his errors in judgment. On João's last evening, he walked to the pond one final time. The carp he'd introduced were thriving, their presence already changing the water's ecology. The noctilucas still existed, but in natural numbers now, creating occasional sparkles rather than the overwhelming display that had served smugglers' purposes. In a generation, perhaps two, they might disappear entirely, leaving only stories of the pond that glowed. He found Padre Miguel there, sitting on the same limestone boulder where João had kept his night vigils. The priest looked older, tired, his fine boots replaced with simple sandals. "I wanted to apologize," Miguel said without preamble, "and to thank you." "For what?" "For finding a solution that served justice without destroying lives. I've been reporting to Lisbon for 2 years, you know. They wanted arrests, examples made. Your way was better. The operation ended, the corruption stopped, but the innocent weren't crushed alongside the guilty." They sat in comfortable silence, watching swallows dive for insects over the water. The priest eventually spoke again. "I'm returning to teaching at the seminary in Évora. This work of watching and reporting, it corrodes the soul. And Van Berg? The Dutch have their own justice. He won't traffic in Portuguese waters again." Miguel stood, brushing dust from his cassock. "That letter you sent to Dr. Soares was masterful, by the way. Enough truth to be believed, enough omission to be merciful." After the priest departed, João remained until full darkness fell. No moon tonight, just stars reflecting in still water. He thought of all the ponds and streams he'd managed over the years, each one a small world with its own secrets and cycles. This one had taught him something new, that sometimes the expert must learn when not to apply his expertise, when to let muddier waters clear on their own. The next morning's departure was deliberately early, avoiding extended farewells. Rosa packed him a basket of food for the journey, including her special fig preserves. Tomás shook his hand solemnly, then handed him a small piece of limestone from the pond's edge, worn smooth by water and time. Even Joaquim appeared, breathless from running, to press a notebook into João's hands. "My observations of the tides and currents. Perhaps they'll be useful for your work." The coach to Tunes station followed the same route João had traveled 2 months earlier, but the landscape looked different now. Or perhaps he was seeing it with different eyes. The telegraph wires still hummed with their electric mysteries. The ancient roads still bore their patient traffic. But he noticed now how the modern and traditional intertwined rather than competed, like different species of fish sharing the same waters.
In his pocket, he carried a letter from the University of Lisbon, inviting him to lecture on bioluminescence in freshwater environments. Another from Dr. Suarez suggested collaboration on a paper about artificial ecosystem maintenance.
His future stretched ahead, predictable and comfortable, filled with the steady rhythms of academic life and controlled experiments. Yet he also carried the memory of glowing water on storm-torn nights, of desperate people making imperfect choices, of light persisting in darkness through whatever means it could find. His work would continue in the measured pools of institutions and the documented streams of science. But part of him would always remember this pond, where nature and human nature had revealed themselves in all their luminous complexity. The train whistle sounded as they approached Tunes, that mechanical cry that marked the centuries' progress toward efficiency and speed. João gripped his satchel and prepared for the journey home, carrying with him the knowledge that some waters run deeper than any expert can fathom, and that wisdom sometimes means knowing when to stop measuring and simply witness the glow.